Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we are thrilled to be your hosts for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dean Lambert. Dean has worked with funeral professionals for nearly 30 years to help them connect and serve families facing one of the most challenging moments of their lives, the death of a loved one. As a father who has experienced the loss of a child, he knows firsthand the grief that clouds the vision needed to honor a life well lived. Dean is leading the Love Always project with a team of experienced subject matter experts and people committed to its purpose, encouraging people to think more positively and proactively about end-of-life issues and funeral prearrangement. Dean, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you for having me, and I'm very grateful to be able to tell the story of Love Always Project and to share my story and hopefully help some people.
Yeah, Dean, before we speak about your work, may I first take you back in time and ask you to share about your story and experience as a grieving father?
Sure. My son, Adam, was in the Marine Corps, and he came home from Afghanistan after spending some time at one final base in California. And it was a rough year. He was obviously experiencing a lot of PTSD symptoms. He, obviously saw a lot of things in the year that he was over there and did some things that are now becoming public in terms of, you might have heard that there's a new law that passed about burn pits, soldiers and Marines and other people who are serving over there being exposed to that. And through a lot of texts that I've kept, a diary that he had, we knew that he had some serious exposure to burn pits. And a lot of times they're talking about that it's refuse and things like that. There are also things that were burned in burn pits. So we know that he had some pretty shocking experiences. And as many veterans know, and parents of veterans, they're still your kids. They're still, you don't think of them as 21 to 25 to 30-year-old folks. And so we kept in contact and experienced all of what he experienced over in Afghanistan, not as viscerally as he did, but it was pretty shocking to hear some of those things. So his PTSD was quite understandable. He after a year of being home, it seemed like on July 4th of 2015, everything was cool. We went out and did a family thing, and he had a job, and he had a companion, a woman that he had been also a veteran who he had been hanging out with. I remember that we were watching movies, and Adam was all into comedy routines and things and memorized every bit of dialogue for movies, which is great because when you're not watching the movie and he brings up a line that sort of is apropos to a situation, it's funny. But it's not so funny, as we all know, when you're actually watching the movie, even if it's for the 10th time that they're saying the dialogue. So we had gotten back. It was late. The fireworks, we went inside, at dusk, just because the obviously fireworks are not the greatest thing for people who have been in theaters of war. And we were watching I think it was Billy Madison or one of the movies from Adam Sandler. And he was going through the dialogue, and I was just tired. So I finally just said, all right, I'm going to bed. And, my daughters were, come on, Adam, cut it out. And he was laughing just like he always did. Just it was a funny night. So I was tired. I didn't want to hear the dialogue. So I said, good night. And I started walking down the hall, and he said, love you, Dad. And He doesn't say that, I mean, he expressed it. He wasn't, not like I'd never heard it before. But in retrospect, I wish I would have turned around and looked at him, because I might have seen something. Because on the morning of July 5th, before light, he had gone out of his walkout basement window of his bedroom and took my car and went about a mile, half a mile away to where we live, right near a river access point where people go tubing and canoeing. And that's where he died by suicide. And we didn't know where he was. I got a text from his girlfriend. He wasn't responding, and so we looked for him all over the place, and got the law enforcement and the fire department involved. The car was down, at the river access, so I knew he was somewhere around there. They put the boat in the water, and I went hiking around the bank, and that's where I saw him. The first thing I saw were his legs, and he was in uniform, in his combat uniform. And the thing about it is that he was very calm that night. And I think it's because he knew he had resolve. And it's interesting that he planned his death better than most people plan their funerals. I mean, in retrospect, he had tried to buy a shotgun, and he couldn't for whatever reason. I don't know if there was something on his military record or whatever, probably because he was working at the sporting goods store where maybe they didn't sell to their employees. But I know he went to another place and bought a black powder rifle, which you can buy without a check. And if anybody knows how to shoot a black powder rifle, that it's a ritual to load that thing. You've got to put the powder in, you've got to put the sabot in, you've got to tamp it down, and there's one shot. And this was a very he planned everything, including what was his dog tags were wrapped in his left hand. He had certain things he wanted, artifacts that he wanted found in his pockets, from photos to notes. And about the only thing that was not in order was where his injury was. And, obviously his that was pretty shocking. So, Sheriff, I told him, I said, I got him. I was very calm. I'm the type of person that, runs towards sort of crises and things. And unfortunately, people interpret that to me to have less care, but I just get very businesslike. I'm the first one to stop when I see a car on the side of the road, or somebody starts choking, I'm looking in the restaurant. So I went into sort of, crisis mode, and basically yelled out to the sheriff, I've got him. And I was actually walking up to him, kneeling next to him, and it was gruesome, but I mean, you don't think of that. And that's when the sheriff came over and said, hey, you got to back off. It's a crime scene. And that's when I noticed that the firearm that was laying across his chest, the first word out of my mouth after the sheriff got there was, thank God it wasn't one of mine, because I do bird hunt and things like that. And I keep everything locked up and I'm very safe. And I knew that. I didn't have any doubts of it, but that was the first thing I said was, thank God it wasn't mine, because you already have enough guilt to leave something out that somebody can do fatal harm to themselves is real difficult. There were a lot of blessings through his death. The funeral, all of his Marine buddies that we had heard so much about and met a couple. It was like his whole life in the military was a movie. And during the funeral, they all jumped on cars. We're Jewish. My son, my wife isn't, but my son related to Judaism. He was going to go on a Birthright trip. I don't know if people know what Birthright is. There's a foundation that allows people who have Jewish parents or a Jewish parent to go to Israel for a couple of weeks. It's a free trip. He did not get to go, but he inspired my daughter to go. And in fact, she converted and met a nice Jewish boy. He's getting married in October. So, these are the ripples that are the blessing of these things that happen. His Marines, we don't typically have a viewing. In Judaism, you bury the deceased very quickly and then mourn for 7 days. His Marine friends wanted to see him. They had to see him. And so we were able to quickly make a change and allow them to come in the night before. And they all drove, got piled in cars and drove from California and from New York. And so we were able to accommodate that. And then it was kind of like seeing the characters from a movie come to life. They came to our house. We keep in contact with them. So what I guess I'm getting at is, while this is a traumatic thing that I still deal with a lot of issues with, my house, when I leave my neighborhood, the entrance to my neighborhood, every time I drive out of here, is I see that river. And then 1 mile down the road is the Veterans Cemetery. So that's where he's buried. For my wife, she would never want to leave here because that's her anchor. To me, it's torture. And so there are a lot of things that happen. And what I would say is that I've been able to take joy in the fact that the funeral, there were people that were calling me from the line outside the funeral saying, it's going to be another hour before I could get even in there, and I have to go somewhere. I buy motorcycles from a dealer that I know is a very, very tight dealer. He doesn't he doesn't spend a lot of money, and yet he closed his shop and let his guys come. The Patriot Guard, rode. My captain called up and allowed me to ride. So there were blessings to this tragedy, and that's all great for when it's all happening. And then afterwards, that's when the journey starts. That's when that's when it's the biggest struggle. So, and then the other thing is, in terms of planning the funeral, both my wife and I work for the same company. We work with funeral homes. She's in funeral homes today. And yet when he died and we went to the funeral home to plan his funeral, it all hit me the moment that the funeral director asked about the livery, the cars and the vehicles. And he said, of course you want our Harley hearse, right? Because Adam rode in the Patriot Guard with me for a couple times, that last year. And that's when it hit me that I was out of my mind, didn't know what I was doing, because he took a step through step if he had not mentioned that Harley hearse and I knew the Patriot Guard was going to ride, I would have forgotten about it. So the other message is that for folks who experience a death, planning in advance is so important, because you're not in your right mind, and you're
not thinking right.
And
you're not.
And you get one shot. You get one shot, no pun intended. So that's the message that I have. That's my story. We're very proud of him, mainly for the effect that he had on others' lives. And that's not unique to my situation, of course, but it sure helps to take solace when, your 23-year-old son dies by suicide and has served in the military and left a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of what ifs. So,
well, thank you. First of all, Dean, thank you for sharing your story, sharing your son's story. And your experience. People who listen to this podcast, they tell us often where they connect is they connect to the story of people who were on our show, because it reminds them that they're not alone, that this is a shared human experience that we're going through, and it's challenging. It's all of those things. And so we certainly thank you for sharing your story.
The one thing I'll say is that you're not alone. But this is something that doesn't happen enough in the world today. And that is trying to understand that every single moment of experience that somebody has that you don't know is different or even similar to yours. But because of their life experience, it makes it different for them. So I agree 100% that it's great to know you're not going alone, not going through it alone. But even when you're in groups that are talking about this, I would encourage people to make sure and have the ears on and listen, because, my son's part of the 22 a day. Yet every single parent that I've met whose son or daughter died by suicide as a result of PTSD, everything that happened before that ended up in that unfortunate circumstance was very different than I am. So that's, to me, that is also shocking. And it's also important to hear the life experience of the people that led up to the event, just because I think that can be as healing as sharing, your own, and not because it's like you, but because it is different than you.
Right. So that is a great point. There's one of the psychotherapists that I follow most on when it comes to just understanding suicide, coined the phrase psychache, and talked about that there's all of these different reasons, different stories, different things that lead up. But in his estimation, he didn't know what to call it. He just said there's this thing, it's the ache of the soul, and it's a different experience for different people. And quite often people, it's a struggle, and that's something that you don't understand unless you have experienced it, similar to a death loss.
I try and tell people, they ask if it gets better. I when you talk to folks who have experienced any kind of a loss, it's hard for me to answer that in a way that makes them feel better, because I don't think it gets better. It just gets different. It changes. Time, especially when you experience the loss of a child, time doesn't heal, because it gives you more time to wonder what if, and to figure out whether you were to blame or whatever. So I'm not saying that you go deeper into, these vestiges of sorrow, but what you think about the situation and how you think about it, it gets different.
We often
Go
often ask the question, how do you actively move forward with?
With you're exactly right. I was at the Iowa State Fair last night, and I was with some lifelong friends who also grew up with Adam, and we were having fun. And I'll tell you that often after I do that, especially I'm with people who knew him for a long time, I'm like, gosh, I feel guilty that I was having a good time. Or they know my son died. They should see me in a different way. And so that's sort of the type of thing that, it could be clinical for people, where they need to talk to somebody about it, or they can, talk to their family about it and realize, if it manifests in a discussion, or you actually tell somebody that, it's easy for them to say, oh, no, you didn't. He would have done, it's not your fault. And you're like, that's kind of like the worst thing that you could say to somebody, because you don't know, how the relationship was. I mean, for crying out loud, I encouraged him to join the Marines, and I already knew he was struggling a little bit. Why would a parent allow even though I come from a military family, I know what happens when you're in the military. My dad was in Vietnam. My brother was a Navy SEAL. And yet I still encouraged him to join the Marines. You don't think I kicked myself out, for that. So when somebody says don't, it's kind of like, I appreciate what you're saying, but you don't understand. So the best you can do is listen and nod and say, I wish you didn't feel that way. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I still feel that way.
I had a lady who used to say all the time in groups, she would say, when people tell me don't, I just hear, oh, this is uncomfortable for you, so I won't bring it up to you again. Like, it doesn't help me for them to say, don't do this. I just know that they're not a safe person for me to share this.
It's hard enough for people to ask me how many kids I have, and to not say 3 because I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I say I have 2 daughters. And then, of course, I'm kicking myself that I didn't talk about my son, who served in a war and got a medal. And, you kind of feel like you forgot about him. Okay, there's another thing to feel guilty about. So, she's that person's absolutely right, that it does make people feel uncomfortable. Because what do they say? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Or, especially if it was a long, long time ago, it's kind of like, so.
Dean, tell us about the Love Always Project. Why is this work important to you?
Okay, so I started working with funeral homes about 30 years ago. I wanted to be a doctor growing up, and I was a military brat, and I never had a hometown. So I wanted to be that town doc, right? Well, I got to school, and my advisor said how many hours of math and science I had to take. And I'm like, okay, where's the band room? So anyway, so I had an ad agency years ago. A funeral home called us to do something for them, and I just kind of got enamored with the business. It had almost everything a physician has. You can be a small town hero, somebody who's serving the community or caring for them on, it's possibly the worst time of their life. And by the time a first year went by and I learned about the business and we had some success marketing for them, doing PR, I realized I think I want to be a funeral director. Funeral director actually told me, you got the goods, but nobody's doing what you're doing for us. Help us tell the story. Help us help people, and make what we do less icky. And so over time, my agency moved into a company that wanted my services, and I've been with that company, that organization, for many years. One of the things we're trying to do is compensate for the fact that funeral homes have scarce resources. They don't do a lot of marketing, and frankly, their family business is handed down. So some of them are not as apt about marketing and running a business and pricing and all the things you have to do, because they're so caring, right? And so I was able to work with the team to start the Love Always Project, which is basically a grassroots effort to help people come together and feel less icky. I always try and say we try and normalize discussions of end of life, and you can't normalize it. It's always going to be strange for many, many reasons. But it's a movement that we've created to promote discussion. We have a forum, we have social media, and we hope to provide a lot of value added material. We do have subject matter experts in hospice and grief and funeral planning. But frankly, if 60 to 70 to 80% of the content was user generated on the Love Always Project, either through blog submissions or discussions in our forum, that would be best, because we want to turn the keys over to the Love Always Project to consumers and people who really want to talk about this. Because I know that when you're more prepared to talk about it, then you are going to have a much better funeral experience, funeral planning experience. And we all know that when you have some certainty around that, that the entire grief process can be, I'll use the word easier, but clinicians will tell me that that's probably not the best word to use. But you move into that with a little less trepidation and a lot more certainty. Like I told you, the Patriot Guard and motorcycles were central to my sons and my life. And yet, if the funeral director didn't show me the picture and say, we have one of these, you want this, right? That was the moment I knew that my son was actually gone and that I wasn't in my right mind. So that's why talking about it. And when you're talking about end of life, it doesn't mean you have to talk about dying and death. What it means is ask your loved ones about their lives. Make sure you understand things about them and ask them questions so that you know what did they love in life? Grandpa, did you ever date somebody before grandma? Did you guys ever break up for a little while? What'd you do in the war? These are things that people talk about, that should talk about at family gatherings and birthdays and things, not just funerals. And that's what the Love Always Project is all about.
I'm curious what your experience has been. I was having lunch with someone yesterday, and a colleague, and we were talking about younger people, and where you're not thinking about death, you're not thinking about the end of life at all. And I'm curious about how your project is addressing maybe that, or reaching out, or that, I guess, that constituency, I don't know how else to describe it, of young adults,
Right.
and what that looks like for them.
Well, what's unfortunate, also social media and the 24-hour news, that's a blessing and a curse, and what we're seeing through crowd listening and social listening and things like that is that younger folks, I'm talking 40 and under, are very much thinking about end of life. Like when Taylor Hawkins from the Foo Fighters died, I'm 60 almost, but I was bummed. And I know people who are fans of the Foo Fighters were very, very bummed out. I mean, I was in a funk for a long time. But how many, folks in the news do you see, Anne Heche? I mean, she was dead before she died. You know what I'm saying? And so it's all around us. And on one hand, it is difficult to hear about it constantly. On the other hand, people are talking about end of life. Younger folks, we're finding, are not only thinking of end of life in more traditional ways, where they want to have more celebrations. For example, the prearrangements that I know that our parent company is handling, the average size of those funerals, the actual amount people are spending, has been going up steadily. Even while there's issues with the economy and things like that. And it's not because people are being more lavish. It's because they're doing more things to honor the life. They also are very celebration oriented. And so on the Love Always Project, we hope to bring people together who can share those experiences and tell those stories about, a 25-year-old person who lost their 80-year-old grandfather, and how they were able to suggest something to their 60-year-old dad, that we should do this for grandpa or grandma or uncle, or God forbid, my college roommate, because, younger people are also dying. So this is what we hope. The interesting thing is Instagram is a much more active and a participatory platform for us than Facebook. And I'm not sure if your listeners know, Facebook tends to trend a little bit older, like maybe in the 45 to 65-year-old range or older, where Instagram is and Snapchat tend to be younger. So we are seeing more younger people with this on their mind. I think that's a good thing, but I don't like the reasons why.
Yeah.
Younger
Yeah.
people.
I get it.
I have a friend who has a travel agency, and she said that she's actually seeing celebrant travel, where people are actually reaching out to her to plan these destination places where one might experience or share about their person that died.
It's exactly right. And for funeral directors, something I've been trying to talk about for 30 years, that's been accepted by some, but they don't like me saying it, is that there's a opportunity for others to move into the funeral planning space. Now, there are laws in certain states where you have to be a funeral director to actually plan a prearranged funeral. But that doesn't mean that some other kind of event planner, like a wedding planner who does destination weddings, if a person has the mind that a funeral is a joyous occasion, yes, there are tears, but you're looking back on a life that had meaning, influence, value, that that's going to be something that is not fun to celebrate necessarily, but a joy to celebrate because they get to see relatives and things. They certainly are planning these destinations because maybe they learned that the loved one liked sailing or enjoyed being in a favorite vacation place, St. Martin's or Naples, Florida, or whatever it is. And so they're going there to have the celebration in their favorite place. Not only that, but maybe they were from Detroit, Michigan, and they want to be in their favorite place. So they're going to their favorite place. Right. So you're absolutely right. I'm seeing a lot of that. Now, whether that filters into the average price of a funeral, indicating celebrants or not, it doesn't really matter because people are spending money other than through funeral homes to celebrate folks' lives. And I do think that you'll see more and more people moving into that space, like your travel agent. I mean, if I was a travel agent today, I'd start marketing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I even went to a funeral where after the service, they asked everybody to come up and have a glass of champagne around the coffin.
Right.
Because the champagne was very symbolic of the woman who died. She was always with champagne.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So, again, these are a lot of people's different experiences. I'm glad that things are evolving the way they are. But folks that actually plan in advance, if you look at the demographic and the life stages of people who actually plan, and you look at the regular population, less than a quarter of people who look like prearrangers even know that it's available. And it's likely because people rely on funeral homes or having a death happen in their family to hear that they could plan in advance. And so we're working in conjunction with funeral professionals to have the Love Always Project be something that allows people to have a much better experience. And believe it or not, it's easier for funeral directors to work with prearranged funerals because then it allows them to be service oriented, which is where their heart and their mind is, and not sales oriented. And the other thing is that when people set funds aside, it becomes less of an aged accounts issue. Many funeral directors have problems with that because they don't like to go knocking on doors for collections. And so it is a win-win-win situation. But before you even think about planning a funeral, you've got to get your arms around the fact that we have to have these discussions. They're the sandwich generation, people between 45 and 65 who have kids in high school and college, and they're planning for that. And then, God forbid, they have elderly or ill parents, which cost them money or time away from work. And all of that stuff, is going to have to be dealt with. It's even worse if you've got to plan the funeral and you don't know how a person wants their body to be, whether they want to cremate it or a full burial, if they want a celebration, or as some people would say, nah, just throw me in a box and blah, blah, blah. Well, this allows you to have that conversation. My father, I know, wants to be buried at Arlington. And recently he's been talking about, he lives in Texas, and recently he's been talking about perhaps being buried with my son at the Iowa Veterans Cemetery. So I don't know whether that's possible or not, but he brought it up to me after we started talking about this. He's 82 years old. He's still working for the Air Force as a contractor in public affairs. And yet now, because he knows what business I'm in, and because I've been asking him some questions like text me, or I have to call the sheriff to check on your house, he's starting to kind of come around and talk about that. And yeah, it's all happening in our own time, but slowly and surely, I'm building up something that will honor my father in the way he wanted, but also something that I'll be able to do that will make me, his friends and family feel really solid about, honoring this guy who's, is a Vietnam War decorated, guy who's worked for the Air Force till he's 82, 3, 4 years old.
Yeah. Well, Dean, this has been a great conversation, and I know helpful to listeners, actually helpful to me personally. So I appreciate that. We're almost out of time.
Okay.
But before we end our conversation, folks who are listening in, they always like to know how they can connect with our guests or with your project, or how might they do that?
Well, we have our website, Love Always Project, all one word, lovealwaysproject.org. And then they can also search in their favorite social media app. We're strongest on Facebook, Instagram. Really, those are the main two. And you'll just type in your search Love Always Project, and you'll see education, and you'll see our heart logo, and that's us. On all of our platforms, we're actively monitoring them. I have a community manager, a team of community managers that actually are watching us all the time, especially because there are some people who are in crisis, and we want to make sure and get them to a resource. So there's a contact button that is always on every single page of our website. And also you can also contact us through our social media platforms. So, but the main place to go would be lovealwaysproject.org. I'd encourage you to join the movement, and it just takes an email. Honestly, we're just building this up. So we're in the very beginnings of building this movement. We've got more community managers and internal stakeholders that are members now, but we have to, it takes time to start everywhere, but we've got great content up there for you to interact with. And we're really happy that you've invited us to come on to the program so that we can talk about this important topic.
Dean, we want to thank you for being a guest here at Let's Talk Death, and for sharing the inspiration, the story of your son, and the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's good to meet you, and I'm sure we'll hopefully bump into each other. We already earlier found out we have some common people that we know. So
no doubt,
the bereavement and end of life world is a very close knit community, and full of people with big hearts.
It is. Thank you for that. And we want to thank those of you who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to our AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And so, again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.